There's a story they whisper in Prague's oldest taverns, where the beer tastes like regret and the walls remember everything. A puppeteer fell in love with his own marionette. Night after night, he'd perform for empty theaters, convinced she moved on her own, convinced her wooden eyes held secrets. They found him years later, strings wrapped around his wrists, having become the puppet himself. You laugh, but tell me, when was the last time you looked at your beloved and saw them, not the phantom you've dressed in their skin? Jung knew what you refused to admit. That thing you call love is a hall of mirrors, each reflection more distorted than the last. You're not holding her hand, you're clutching at projections, at the disowned fragments of your own psyche that you've painted onto another human being like graffiti on a cathedral wall. The anima, Jung called it, that feminine shadow within every man. The parts of himself he's too terrified to claim, so he searches for them in every woman who passes by his window. Picture this. You meet someone. Their laugh reminds you of summer rain on hot concrete. Within weeks, you've written an entire mythology around them. She becomes the repository for every unfulfilled dream, every unspoken need, every quality you've amputated from yourself because someone, somewhere, told you boys don't cry, men don't feel, warriors don't write poetry. The research is merciless. A 2024 study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that 73% of what we perceive as chemistry in early romance is actually projection. We're literally falling in love with aspects of ourselves we see mirrored in another. The brain, that cruel magician, releases the same neurochemicals whether we're gazing at our beloved or at our own reflection after 3 drinks. But here's where it turns grotesque. She starts to suffocate under the weight of your projections. Every time she acts human, tired, irritable, wonderfully flawed, you feel betrayed. How dare she not be the goddess you've constructed? How dare she have bad breath in the morning, opinions that differ from yours, a past that doesn't include worshiping at your altar? Kierkegaard wrote about this with the exhaustion of a man who'd loved too many ghosts. Most people are subjective toward themselves and objective toward all others, frightfully objective sometimes. But the task is precisely to be objective toward oneself and subjective toward all others. A translation: you know yourself least of all, so you project your unknown self onto others and call it destiny. The velvet curtains in your mind part, and there she stands. Not the real woman with her own dreams and demons, but your anima in a stolen dress. You've been making love to your own shadow, arguing with your own fears, proposing to your own loneliness wrapped in someone else's perfume. Here's the sick joke. The very qualities that magnetize you to someone are often the precise aspects of yourself you've buried in the basement of your psyche. Drawn to her spontaneity? You've strangled your own. Mesmerized by his confidence? You've been apologizing for existing since you were 7. That chemistry you feel? It's the sizzle of recognition, not of them, but of your own exiled self, finally glimpsed in another's eyes. A man once told me, after his 3rd divorce, I kept marrying the same woman. Different faces, same ghost. He'd spent 40 years projecting his dead mother onto every woman who showed him kindness, then raging when they refused to stay frozen in that role. The puppet strings were invisible, but they cut just the same. Listen to the rain against your window tonight. Each drop carries a question. Who are you really loving? The flesh and blood human with their own sovereign existence, or the phantom you've summoned from your own depths? When you whisper, "I love you" in the darkness, are you speaking to them, or to the parts of yourself you're too cowardly to embrace? The candle flickers. Wax pools like small griefs. Somewhere, a puppeteer realizes his marionette has no strings, never did. The dance was always his alone. You want to know the most terrifying part? Once you see the projection, you can't unsee it. Every future love becomes suspect. Every attraction carries the stench of narcissism. You'll find yourself in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you're capable of loving anything that isn't secretly yourself in disguise. But here's the gossamer thread of hope, thin as spider's silk. Recognition is the first death. And from death comes the possibility of rebirth. When you finally see your projections for what they are, when you reclaim those exiled parts of yourself instead of hunting for them in others, only then can you love someone for who they actually are. Terrible, beautiful, separate from you. Tell me, puppet master, are you brave enough to cut your own strings? Every embrace is a small funeral for who you might have been. Do you hear that? It's the sound of skin forgetting how to feel. A million nerve endings going numb, one by one, like stars dying in reverse order of their birth. I'll tell you a secret that shouldn't be spoken after midnight. Every relationship is a cemetery where parts of you go to die. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, gently. Like falling asleep in a warm bath. You don't notice you're drowning until the water's already in your lungs. Consider the mathematics of modern intimacy. A 2025 neurological study from Uppsala University found that couples who've been together more than 5 years show a 67% reduction in dopamine response to their partner's touch. The same hand that once sent lightning through your veins now feels like furniture. Familiar, functional, dead. But it's not just the chemistry that withers. It's something more insidious. Watch closely. First goes the way you used to laugh. Wild and uncontained, because she wrinkles her nose when you're too loud. Then goes the poetry you used to write at 3 a.m. because he says it's pretentious. Fragment by fragment, you perform small amputations on yourself, sacrificial offerings to the god of compatibility. Schopenhauer, that cheerful bastard, compared human relationships to porcupines huddling for warmth in winter. Get too close and you'll pierce each other. Stay too far and you'll freeze. But he missed the third option. You can file down your quills until you're smooth and harmless. A porcupine-shaped absence where a creature used to be. There's an old Romanian folktale about a woman who loved a man so deeply that she gave him one finger at a time, convinced each sacrifice brought them closer. By the time she was fingerless, he'd grown bored of her devotion and moved on to someone with hands intact. The moral isn't about choosing better partners. It's about the voluntary mutilations we perform in love's slaughterhouse. Watch any couple who's been together for decades. Notice the choreography of their interactions. Each movement predicted, each response scripted. They've memorized each other so thoroughly that surprise has been assassinated. They finish each other's sentences not from intimacy, but from exhaustion. The spontaneous self has been buried under so many compromises that they need archaeological equipment to find it. Here's what the marriage counselors won't tell you. That comfortable numbness you feel, it's not peace. It's rigor mortis. You've been so busy building a life together that you've forgotten to check if either of you is still alive inside it. But the real horror? You'll defend your cage. You'll mistake familiar suffering for love, chronic disappointment for maturity. You'll point to your shared Netflix queue and joint checking account as evidence of connection, not seeing them as the silk-lined coffin they've become. You'll say things like, relationships take work while your soul performs its own autopsy. I once met a man who'd been married for 30 years. When I asked him about passion, he laughed. Not with humor, but with the hollow sound of wind through empty houses. Passion, he said. I wouldn't recognize my own desires if they knocked on my door. I've spent so long being us that I is a foreign language. The candle on my desk burns lower, casting shadows that look like all the selves you've abandoned. Each flicker illuminates another small death. The adventurer who wanted to travel alone. The artist who needed solitude to create. The dreamer who required vast inner spaces to breathe. All sacrificed on the altar of togetherness. Their ghosts haunting the edges of every I love you. Jung understood this, perhaps too well. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation and destruction wear the same mask in the dark. How do you know if you're becoming more yourself or less? How do you measure the self that's been dissolved in the acid of compromise? Listen, right now, in this moment, parts of you are dying. Not metaphorically, literally. Neural pathways you don't use atrophy. Dreams deferred poison the bloodstream. The person you might have been grows dimmer with each passing day, a ghost of possibility haunting your actual life. So here's my question, whispered like a curse or a blessing. What parts of yourself have you already buried? And more terrifyingly, would you recognize them if they clawed their way back to the surface? The graveyard of touch is full tonight. Moonlight illuminates the headstones. Here lies spontaneity. Here lies solitary joy. Here lies the self that existed before the pronouns changed from I to we. But sometimes, just sometimes, in the depths of night, when your partner sleeps beside you like a stranger, you feel it, a flutter of something uncompromised within you, a self that refuses to die. It whispers dangerous truths about resurrection, about lives that can be unburied, about the terrible freedom that comes from choosing yourself over the comfortable cemetery of coupled existence. The question isn't whether love requires sacrifice. The question is, are you sacrificing the excess or the essence? Are you pruning the garden or poisoning the roots? Feel your own pulse. Still there? Good. Not everything is dead yet. You're mourning a phantom while the living starve for your attention. Have you ever noticed how the most exquisite tortures are self-administered? Picture this. A man builds a museum in his mind, every hall dedicated to a different woman who left. He spends his days as curator and sole visitor, polishing memories until they gleam like lies, rearranging exhibits of what could have been. Meanwhile, outside the museum, real women pass by, but he doesn't see them. He's too busy genuflecting before the altar of absence. There's a word in Portuguese, saudade, for the presence of absence, the weight of what's missing. But even that's too beautiful for what we do to ourselves. We don't just feel the absence, we worship it. We build entire religions around the ones who left, turning rejection into relics, crafting hagiographies of people who probably forgot our name. Here's the grotesque mathematics. A 2024 study in behavioral neuroscience found that the brain literally cannot distinguish between imagining a perfect relationship and mourning a real one. The same regions light up. The same chemicals flood the system. You're getting high on your own manufactured melancholy, a junkie for the needle of nostalgia. Listen to Kierkegaard, patron saint of the romantically doomed. The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. But he was only half right. The most painful state is preferring that imagined future to any possible present, choosing the sweetness of fantasy over the salt of reality. I knew a woman once, brilliant, beautiful in that wounded way that makes you want to save someone. She kept a drawer full of wedding rings from relationships that never made it to the altar. Not engagement rings she'd received, rings she'd bought herself for weddings that existed only in her imagination. Each one inscribed with a date that never came to pass. She wore them on a chain around her neck, a rosary of romantic failures, proof of all the lives she could have lived. Why? I asked her once, after too much wine had made us both honest. Because, she said, fingering the heaviest ring, disappointment is the only thing that's never disappointed me. This is what we do. We take our failed loves and preserve them in formaldehyde, displaying them like prize specimens. We tell ourselves stories about the one that got away, conveniently forgetting that we probably drove them off with our neediness, our projections, our refusal to see them as they actually were. But here's the truly sick part. We prefer it this way. The museum is safer than the street. The imaginary beloved can't leave you, can't disappoint you, can't turn out to be human. They remain frozen in the amber of possibility, forever young, forever perfect, forever absent. Jung called this the regressive restoration of the persona, a fancy way of saying we retreat into fantasy when reality proves too difficult. But it's worse than retreat. It's a full-scale colonization of the present by an imagined past, a coup where ghosts overthrow the living. Meanwhile, what happens to the real people in your life? They become competitors in a race they don't know they're running, measured against phantoms, forever falling short of memories that have been edited until they're fiction. You sit across from a real woman at dinner, but you're comparing her laugh to a ghost's. You hold a real hand, but it feels wrong because it's not the imaginary hand you've been holding in your dreams. The French have a phrase, l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the staircase. The perfect response you think of too late. We live our entire romantic lives on that staircase, perfecting conversations with people who've already left the building. A 2025 psychological study from the University of Copenhagen found something chilling. People who spend more than 2 hours a day in romantic rumination show the same brain patterns as those with clinical depression. We're literally making ourselves sick with ghosts, poisoning ourselves with possibilities that were never possible. Here's a game for the brave. Count how many hours this week you've spent thinking about someone who isn't in your life versus someone who is. Count the energy you've poured into imaginary conversations, fantasy reconciliations, elaborate scenarios where they finally see your worth. Now imagine, just imagine, what might happen if you invested that same energy in the present tense. But you won't. I know you won't. Because the museum is temperature controlled and the street is chaos. Because phantom love is perfect and real love is terrifying. Because it's easier to love someone who isn't there than to risk being seen by someone who is. The candles in the museum never burn down. The flowers in the exhibits never wilt. The conversations always go exactly as planned. It's paradise, if paradise were a morgue. So tell me, curator, how many more years will you spend dusting exhibits in your museum? How many real hands will you refuse to hold because you're busy clutching shadows? There's an exit door in every museum. It's usually marked with a green light, glowing softly in the dark. It leads to a world where people have morning breath and say the wrong things and love imperfectly. But actually, the door is unlocked. It's always been unlocked. But you have to want to leave the museum more than you want to keep your ghosts, do you? Solitude is the black mirror where gods and monsters take turns wearing your face. Let me tell you about the moment a man becomes dangerous to himself and to everyone who might love him. It happens in the third week of true solitude, not loneliness. That's just solitude wearing a victim's mask. I mean the kind of alone that echoes in your bone marrow, where you can finally hear your own thoughts without the static of other people's expectations. That's when the alchemy begins. That's when you discover whether you're gold or lead inside. There's an ancient hermetic principle, solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, you must become liquid, lose all shape, surrender every definition of yourself that came from others' mouths. Only then can you congeal into something true. But most men never make it past the dissolution. They panic at the first sign of formlessness and run back to the nearest warm body, begging to be told who they are. I'll share something the self-help gurus would charge you thousands to ignore. A 2025 study from the Institute of Contemplative Science found that people who spent 30 days in intentional solitude showed radical changes in brain structure, increased gray matter in areas associated with self-awareness, but also heightened activity in regions linked to existential terror. You literally become more yourself and more afraid of what that means. Picture Nietzsche in his boarding house in Turin, writing by candlelight, slowly going mad with clarity. He wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." But here's what he didn't say. Sometimes becoming the monster is the point. Sometimes the abyss gazing back is the first honest conversation you've ever had. The alchemists knew something we've forgotten in our age of constant connection. Transformation requires a closed vessel. You cannot change while you're leaking energy into every relationship, every distraction, every notification that pings your phone. The opus magnum, the great work of becoming, demands hermetic sealing. No exits, no audiences, no escape routes back to your former self. Here's where it gets deliciously dark. In true solitude, you meet all the selves you've been avoiding. The coward, the tyrant, the abandoned child, the God-complex narcissist, the sexual deviant, the mystic, the murderer of dreams. They've been waiting in the basement of your psyche. And now, with no one else to project them onto, they come upstairs for dinner. A Tibetan saying goes, "When you realize nothing is lacking, the whole world belongs to you. But first, you must realize everything is lacking." First comes the stripping away, the flaying of every identity that isn't truly yours. Do you know how few men survive their own company long enough to reach the other side? I once spent a winter alone in a cabin in the Norwegian woods. By the second month, I was having full conversations with aspects of myself I'd disowned since childhood. The angry one, the tender one, the one who still believed in magic. They sat around my fire like old friends I'd betrayed, and we had it out. Every lie, every compromise, every time I'd chosen comfort over truth. By the third month, something shifted. The internal civil war ended not with victory, but with integration. I became large enough to contain contradictions, strong enough to be weak, whole enough to be broken. The alchemical marriage the old text spoke of, it wasn't between me and another person. It was between all the warring aspects of myself. But here's the poison in the medicine. Once you've tasted true solitude, relationships become optional rather than necessary. You realize most connections are crutches. Most conversations are noise. Most intimacies are elaborate ways to avoid the terror of being alone with yourself. You become the man women say they want, self-contained, mysterious, complete. And that's precisely when you become too dangerous to love safely. A 2024 neuroscience study from Heidelberg University found something disturbing. Men who had undergone extended solitary retreats showed decreased activation in brain regions associated with social bonding, but increased activation in areas linked to spiritual experience. They literally rewired themselves for transcendence over connection. The monks knew. The hermits knew. The madmen who walked into deserts and came back speaking in tongues. They all knew the terrible secret. You cannot find yourself in another's eyes. You can only find yourself in the darkness behind your own closed lids. So here's my riddle for you, whispered from one darkness to another. Are you brave enough to be absolutely alone until aloneness transforms from prison to palace? Can you sit with yourself until the screaming stops and the real conversation begins? Or will you keep running from room to room in the haunted house of yourself, looking for an exit that leads anywhere but inward? The candle burns low. Shadows dance on the wall like all the people you'll never need again once you learn to need yourself. In the distance, a wolf howls. Or maybe it's just the sound of your own soul, finally allowed to speak its mother tongue. Solitude is not preparation for relationship. Solitude is the relationship, the only one that lasts from birth to death, the only one that can never abandon you, the only one that knows all your secrets and loves you anyway, or doesn't. And that's freedom too. The alchemical process is almost complete. Lead into gold, or gold into lead. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference in the dark, but one thing is certain, you'll never be the same. And that's precisely what everyone's afraid of. When the last illusion dies, you discover you're finally free to live. Come closer. This is the part they don't want you to hear. There's a moment in every man's life, if he's very lucky or very cursed, when the entire cathedral of his illusions collapses. Not dramatically, not with trumpets and falling angels, but quietly, like snow settling on gravestones. One moment you're defending your life, your loves, your elaborate mythology of self, and the next, you're standing in the ruins, laughing, because it's all so absurd, so magnificently, liberatingly absurd. The Japanese have a concept, mono no aware, the pathos of things, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. But that's too gentle for what I'm describing. This is more like what the Gnostics called the kanoma, the cosmic joke, the divine comedy of taking yourself seriously in a universe that's 13.8 billion years old and doesn't know your name. Let me paint you a picture with blood and starlight. A man spends 40 years building his identity. Good husband, strong provider, keeper of promises, guardian of other people's comfort. He collects roles like armor, each one heavier than the last. Then one Tuesday afternoon, it's always a Tuesday, isn't it? He's sitting in traffic, NPR droning about interest rates. When it hits him, none of it matters. Not in the way he thought. The marriage, the mortgage, the meticulously maintained charade, it's all a game everyone agreed to play, but no one remembers starting. And instead of despair, he feels euphoria. A 2025 study from the Center for Existential Psychology found that men who experience what researchers call comprehensive meaning collapse show surprising outcomes. 68% report increased life satisfaction within 6 months, not despite losing all meaning, but because of it. When nothing matters in the ultimate sense, everything matters in the immediate sense. When you stop performing your life, you can finally live it. This is what Jung meant when he wrote about the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites. The moment you accept your complete insignificance is the moment you become cosmically significant. The moment you stop needing love is when you become capable of it. The moment you embrace your absolute aloneness is when genuine connection becomes possible. But here's the delicious paradox that makes philosophers weep and poets sing. This freedom terrifies everyone around you. Your partner, who was comfortable with your performance, now faces a man without a script. Your friends, who knew their roles in your drama, suddenly find the theater's gone dark. You've become the most dangerous creature in the social ecosystem, a man who needs nothing from anyone. Schopenhauer, in one of his rare moments of savage joy, wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." But even he didn't go far enough. It's not just about loving solitude. It's about loving the death of everything you thought you needed. I'll tell you about the most beautiful thing I ever witnessed. An old Serbian man, a survivor of things that would break most souls, sitting in a Belgrade cafe. His wife had left him. His children had forgotten him. His country had disappeared into history. He was drinking Turkish coffee and reading Rilke, and his face, I'll never forget his face, radiated the most profound peace I've ever seen. "How?" I asked him, young and stupid and desperate for answers. He smiled like a Buddha who'd been through hell and found it funny. "When you lose everything," he said, "you discover that everything was nothing. And then you are free to appreciate this coffee, this moment, this breath, without needing it to mean anything beyond what it is." The beautiful apocalypse isn't about destruction, it's about revelation. Apocalypse literally means unveiling. What's unveiled when all your illusions die? Just this. You, here, now, breathing, absurdly, impossibly alive in a universe that shouldn't exist but does. And love? Love after the beautiful apocalypse is something else entirely. It's not need dressed in romantic clothing. It's not projection wearing a wedding ring. It's two people who've survived their own meaninglessness, choosing to create meaning together. Temporary, fragile, all the more precious because they know it will end. A 2024 MIT study on post-nihilistic relationships found something remarkable. Couples who acknowledge the ultimate meaninglessness of their bond report deeper intimacy than those clinging to forever. When you stop needing relationship to save you from existential terror, you can finally enjoy it for what it is, a brief conspiracy of tenderness against the dark. So here's my final question, posed at the edge of the abyss with a smile. What would you do tomorrow if you truly understood that nothing you do matters in the grand scheme, and that this meaninglessness is not a curse, but the most radical permission slip the universe could offer? What would you create, knowing it will crumble? Who would you love, knowing they will die? How would you live, knowing that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be danced with? The candle has burned down to nothing. The wax pools like a small lake of light. In the morning, even this will be gone, and that's perfect too. Welcome to the beautiful apocalypse, where everything is lost and nothing is missing, where love is possible precisely because it's pointless, where you're free to build sandcastles at the edge of the rising tide, not despite their impermanence, but because of it. The cosmic joke? You've been free all along. You just had to lose everything to notice. And now you have. What will you do with this terrible, beautiful freedom?